Hello there, everyone. This week we're going to talk about AT reports and recommendations. This is week 5 of SED 636 Critical Issues. This week we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. We're going to take your readings that you did, and we're just going to look at some examples of actually those different principles into practice. I'm going to show you some examples of some note-taking and a set framework filled out during evaluations. We're going to look at 3 different examples of recommendations within AT reports. We're going to talk a little bit about the issues within those recommendations. And we're also going to look at an example of a training resource to kind of build on some of that trainer's guide that you guys looked over this week. This is also really going to help lay the groundwork for your final project. This is why I had you read this early on in the course so that you can start really thinking and have that background knowledge to really think about your final project rather than giving it to you a couple weeks beforehand. So here's the breakdown of some of the examples we're going to be looking at tonight. We're going to look at a set framework. We're also going to look at some session note-taking examples, and these are just from my particular practice. You'll definitely change this if you continue on and do evaluations, but I just want to talk a little bit about that with you. We're going to look at some different examples of recommendations and also some training resources. You'll have some visuals of this during this lecture, but they're all uploaded to Blackboard 9. Some of the formatting kind of got a little wacky, so if you want to follow along on a real formatted copy, you can download those from Blackboard 9. This is an example of the layout that I used for my set framework when I get an evaluation. Typically what I'll do is I'll use the file review as my time when I fill out my set framework. So I usually will put the contact and at the school, the parent information, and then I start going through. So I change the student's name, obviously. We're looking at Justin Bieber here. I gave some examples of the current functioning of the student, and I'm sure you're going to be going through this in your evaluation course, but one of your chapters in the Practical and Fun Guide really talk about note-taking and the importance of having your questions when you go into an evaluation ready. When I fill out my set framework and I do my file review before I meet with the teachers, it really makes sure that my interview is targeted, that I'm asking the right questions so that the teachers are giving me the best information. And same thing with the parents too. I find it very nice to be able to reference specific reports or specific examples within the child's files, just so that at least everyone knows that I've looked at it, I've acknowledged it, and I'm up to speed with where I should be. And I know that there is definitely some confusion sometimes looking at the set framework on the student and the environment. And sometimes the task and different definitions put things in different places. What I typically do is the student is any current functioning, any likes or dislikes of the student, basic information about the student. And then I talk about the environment, some of the services that they get, depending on what kind of a classroom they're in. That's what I put in environment. And then the task is what the parent and what the school typically want to see out of the evaluation and the target areas of concern. Like I said, there are definitely different definitions and you'll get some different perspectives, but you really want to find what's best for you. This is how I best organize it. And my last area is the tool. So I talk about what the child is currently using in school, and this is where I list the current information, and then my bottom line is what I want to find out. So if I have some specific questions for the teachers, or maybe that I want to start my evaluation off on, that's what I list down here. So here I didn't have too many specific questions, so I just wanted to look at the typing speed on an iPad, talk of a para because I knew that in the paperwork there was some discussion of having a para, but the child didn't have one at that time, and then what I want to try. So I listed some of the things that I started brainstorming about, and then you'll see in my notes section that I elaborate a little bit more on that. This is where some of my formatting got a little bit wacky, but this is when I start organizing some of my sessions, especially for a complex case like this one was. I really wanted to organize myself specifically and make sure that whatever activity I had the child do, that it was really targeted and I got some good information. So what I did is I made a chart, and you'll see if you upload this, it actually is in a chart form. and I have the area that I was looking at, and I had the specific app that was going to be targeting that. And I put in some features that were important to me, and then during the evaluation I actually listed some observations. And same thing, I looked down, I had number sense, and then I had some particular apps to try. And also down at the bottom you can see I talk about using iPrompts during the session and gathering a writing baseline. Once again, I'm sure in your evaluation class you'll hear of a lot of different ways to gather some writing information. Your professor will talk about the written productivity profile, which is great. I kind of take bits and pieces of different things that I find work best for me. So if you have any questions specifically about my process, please let me know. But I do think it's important to tailor things to your specific needs and how your style of doing things is. Here's the second part of my notes for that session, and what's really important is specifically looking at the Clicker 6, and then I also looked at the Clicker app. And you can see my activities that I have. I always scaffold them. So first she starts off with a visual model, and then an auditory model, and then no model. And then I see how she does with kind of that structured scaffolded support. And then you can see same thing in Clicker sentences. We start off with forced order, so she feels that success, and I can see engage how she does with that. Same thing, then I move on to farm sentences, had a visual model, prompted model, and then no model. So I really make sure that all of my activities are purposeful, and I'm gathering some important information either on access method or specific writing support. What I've started doing more recently, and I know once again in your practical and fun guide they do talk a lot about note taking, and they talk about having a backup AT trainer, and unfortunately I'm definitely not in a position for that, and I hope you'll find yourselves in a position where you can have someone with you, but typically it's really just me. I know some other AT specialists that actually use a live scribe pen, which will record the session as it's going on and make your notes interactive links to then review afterwards. I particularly don't use that. I found that I actually have a very small 7-inch tablet that I then use to take notes on during the evaluation. I found that when I was taking notes on an iPad with a keyboard, it was really obstructive, and the student was really focusing on the fact that I was taking notes, and sometimes it was distracting to the evaluation environment. And so now with this smaller tablet, I can kind of hold it like a phone, so I'm just typing with my thumbs, and I can put it down enough, and I'm kind of a pretty good touch typer on that, so that I can get a lot of information but not have that obstruction with the student. And it's a lot easier than having handwritten notes and then having to go back and then type them afterwards. There's also an app called AT Eval to Go, which is a very nice elaborate graphic organizer for AT evaluations where you can input your observations and then it converts it to a Microsoft Word document. Once again, I've just found that taking notes and taking consistent notes on an iPad for me typically doesn't work. And it's really just finding your particular comfort zone and what works the best for you. So I've adapted some of these models, and depending on the student, I will have different notes of the activity that I'm doing and then my targeted goal from that. But now, like I said, I have it electronically that I do on this tablet instead of handwriting it. And this is an example of something that I hand wrote and then transcribed into my evaluation. What I would like you to do now in your blog is talk a little bit about what kind of a note taker you are and what system do you think would work best for you. I know, like I said, I definitely started off as a handwriter, and then as the evaluation got through, I kind of realized that my handwriting notes didn't provide me as much description, as much information as I wanted to. So just kind of describe yourself a little bit as a note taker and kind of how you can envision yourselves taking notes and keeping up with something like this. And if you do it currently in practice now, I'm sure a lot of you have to take notes in your sessions and gather data while you're working with the child. What has worked best for you? Because it's always awesome to share a lot of this information with each other. What I would like you to do with the AT evaluation recommendations, what I've done is on these examples, I've uploaded 3 different examples of recommendations for 3 separate students. And what I would just like you to do in your blog is provide some critical feedback on them. What I tend to do is I really tailor my recommendations based on the team's needs, the parent relationships. There's a lot of different ways that I decide and kind of try and play off my recommendations based on the specific case. So what I would just like you to do is really analyze the recommendations that are provided here. You can tell some of the canned paragraphs, some of the options, and just your feedback on, what you think is the most beneficial. You as a teacher, you as a receiving professional, how would you feel about this, or even as a parent? In your book, they talk a lot about the different types of recommendations and a would do and a should do. So I've given you some different examples of recommending particular things for purchase or recommending a trial. So just kind of what I would like you to do once again is compare and contrast the 3 in your blog, but really analyze them and give some feedback on, what you think is the best. And if you were receiving this, how would you feel? But what I also think is really important is you can see at the beginning of this evaluation here is that I highlight part of the Connecticut Assistive Technology Guidelines. And this was specifically from 1999. Since then, they just did a reauthorization in 2013, and this is from last year, so I didn't have that. But looking at the range of low, mid, and high tech. And what I then did in subsequent is a response to that is that I organized all of the recommendations linked to the IEP goal and objective, and I truly believe that's an extremely important part of it, especially if that aspect is lost within the team or within the evaluation. And typically I can feel out a team on if the connection to the IEP is lost. I try and really put it in there for the recommendations so that at the PPT that it's really the focus. What I also think is very interesting is the perspective of the authors in the Practical and Fun Guide to not have the AT specialist at the PPT. And I definitely see their perspective, and I do believe that it's very difficult to effectively empower teams to feel like the AT specialist doesn't need to be there. And I think some districts really see that, and typically I will be asked to attend, or an AT specialist will be asked to attend, but making sure that it's linked to the IEP really puts the power back into the IEP rather than putting it on the specialist and putting it on the expert. What I also really like in the Practical and Fun Guide is they talk about the differences between the facts in the report and the opinions. And I always try and emphasize that I am an outside evaluator coming in. The team is the expert on the student. So they really can evaluate on if my recommendations will work long term. And that's a really important aspect and something that I really try and press on teams, that I've met with this child for maybe 5 hours. And what I see might not be a clear snapshot of the actual child's abilities and what might really work long term. So really considering that. But also the importance of the low and the high tech AT plan. Almost never is one specific device or one specific program the be-all, end-all, and the solution. So giving various options for various situations is essential. So you can examine these much closer and kind of reflect on them in your blog, but this was something that I really find important in some cases to highlight that assistive technology doesn't mean just a computer, it doesn't mean just an iPad. What you can also see in this specific recommendation is that I have quite a bit in the appendix, and as you go through you can look and see, and I'm a big supporter of providing options for teams and giving various resources for different things. So I fill quite a bit up in the appendix and give various resources there also. In this next part of these recommendations for this particular student, I talk a little bit about guided access on the iPad and then also how to actually set it up. And then I move on to visual scheduling, and this is more of a should do, and looking at trialing and implementing something just to see if it would actually help. And that's something, once again, that's really important to impress on a team that it might have worked in an evaluation for a short period of time, but the real test is long-term and in the child's actual day-to-day environment, will it still be effective? Here's the second student's recommendations that I included. This was a much more specific case where instead of having a link to the IEP goals and objectives, I have links to specific tasks within the classroom, linking it to a specific tool, and then also providing a rationale in order to support the recommendation for that tool or lack thereof. So this is something that I'm really eager to see some of your feedback on and see how you like this particular model. The third and final example is for a student where a trial was specifically recommended. So I have my rationale based on why I'm asking for a trial. And then I also outline the specific programs and the links to the goals and objectives that will happen within the trials. So here there's two trials, looking at an iPad and also looking at a laptop, and then the specific programs, and then also linked to the goals and objectives. What happened on this page is there were specific IEP goals and objectives that were linked to the evaluation, but there could also be some additional support for other areas of the IEP that were not directly linked. And so that's this particular section up here at the top for the additional recommendations. So that's where I looked at some other areas where the student could be supported, not just specific to the IEP goals and objectives that were listed on the paperwork. What I also provided here down at the bottom is some low-tech resources, and then talking a little bit about assistive technology services to help the team facilitate the actual trial. So just to summarize, in your blog this week, I would like you to respond and talk about your note-taking style, and how you think you could either adapt that or what you currently do now in looking at AT evaluations. I would like your analysis and feedback on the 3 examples of recommendations. And really looking at what are some of the specific benefits of one style, and then what might also be the downfalls. And lastly, what I would really like you to talk about is the importance of variation and why it's important. Why is it significant that I showed you these specific 3 examples of recommendations? The final thing that I want to touch on is I had you read the AT Trainer's Guide and kind of just take an overview of that, because I want you to start thinking about the actual training and the implementation, because that's one of the major issues that we're going to start really talking about, and this has really built the foundation to then actually look at the implementation and where the holes can come. So you read the AT Trainers. What I have done is I have uploaded a clicker training resource into Blackboard 9. And I want you to look at that training resource. And in addition to the other things on the blog that we talked about in the last slide, the one thing I want you to add is what are the benefits or the downfalls to this type of a resource. And draw on some of the things that you read in your AT Trainer's Guide, and looking at start thinking about how you could improve something like that, and how you could present this type of information to really promote success and promote implementation of assistive technology and of a program like Clicker, or whatever program you might be recommending in the end when you're looking towards your final project of your classroom evaluation. this is something like what your final project is going to be looking like, some sort of a resource like this, but I want to have a more in-depth discussion after you guys look at this on how it can even be improved even more once we talk about some more of the issues in regards to implementation. So once again, thank you very much all. Thank you all for your time. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions about anything, and I hope you all have a great week.